What happened in Sarajevo would not only provoke the warmongers in Vienna, but would also completely extinguish the faint hope for peace that still existed in the long-strained relations between Austria-Hungary and Serbia. Vienna had adopted an almost unanimously pro-war stance, but the matter could not be resolved merely through discussions at the table. It soon became clear that an immediate military intervention, as some advocated, was impossible. First, Tisza, the Hungarian side of the dual monarchy, had to be persuaded. Within the dual system, it was politically and constitutionally impossible to disregard Tisza. Moreover, Serbia's involvement in the crime had to be proven. On the afternoon of June 30th, in a meeting with Berchtold, Tisza stated that the Serbian government should be given time to demonstrate its goodwill. Another sensitive matter was determining the best moment for the army to act. Conrad favoured striking at once, but even he told Berchtold on the morning of June 30th that the general staff would need 16 days to mobilise the army. Given the cumbersome nature of Austria's military apparatus, this estimate would prove overly optimistic. Above all, Austria's greatest concern was Germany's stance. Would Berlin agree to a declaration of war against Serbia? On July 1st, in a report submitted to Emperor Franz Joseph, Tisza warned that the German emperor harboured a pro-Serb prejudice and stressed that he must be convinced to support Vienna's Balkan policy. When Wilhelm II came to Vienna for the Archduke's funeral, Austrian statesmen hoped that the two emperors would meet face-to-face and exchange views. However, the visit was cancelled due to intelligence suggesting that there was also a plot to assassinate the German emperor. Other means would be needed to ensure coordinated policy with Berlin. At least on one point, Berchtold, Tisza and the other statesmen agreed. Before taking action, Germany's consent must be secured. Around this time, secret contacts began between the two sides. A German journalist close to the government got in touch with Count Alexander Hoyos, private secretary to Austrian Foreign Minister Berchtold. Hoyos had been chosen for these unofficial talks for a reason. During the Bosnian annexation crisis, he had been sent to Berlin to secure Germany's support, and he was known as a representative of the hawkish faction. The Germans were well aware of this. After an initially measured dialogue, the two men spoke openly and agreed on the need to punish Serbia. The real test would be whether Russia intended to fight. Journalist Victor Naumann believed the Kaiser could be persuaded. If one speaks to Kaiser Wilhelm in the right way at this moment, when he has just experienced the horror of the Sarajevo murder, he will give us every assurance, and because he understands the dangers threatening the principle of monarchy, this time he will go as far as war. In other words, if the Austrians presented their case while the Kaiser was still angry over his friend's murder, he would agree to war with Serbia. A further development played into the hands of the Central Powers. After the assassination, Gavrilo Princip, once in custody, initially denied any connection to a wider conspiracy. But the next day, during interrogation, another member of the group, Jabranovic, admitted he was friends with Princip. He denied the existence of an organized plot at first, but under pressure he confessed. He tried to convince the authorities that only the two of them were involved, but the decisive confession came from another captured conspirator, the plot's organizer, Danilo Ilic. To save his life, on Wednesday, July 1st, he revealed the names of the other three conspirators. Princip himself gave in on Thursday, July 2nd, urging the others to tell the authorities what they knew, claiming there were many victims and that they should speak up. While Princip took responsibility and tried to get the others to repeat the same story, he hoped to prevent the Austrian investigation from reaching Belgrade. But of course, the investigation continued in full. These confessions strengthened the hand of Vienna's leaders. In the first week of July, the discussion in Vienna turned to how the memorandum for official contact with Berlin should be delivered. If sent by post, the Germans might not take it seriously enough. If delivered by Foreign Minister Berchtold himself, other states might realize Austria was preparing something. If entrusted to the 73-year-old Hungarian-born ambassador in Berlin, Szugényi, it might not have the desired impact. The most suitable choice for Vienna was Count Oyos, who had made unofficial contact with the Germans just days earlier. Choosing Oyos would leave no doubt in Berlin about Vienna's intentions. A staunch hawk, he would make Austria's demands crystal clear. Events moved quickly. On the afternoon of July 4th, the decision was made, and Count Oyos departed that very night. Arriving in Berlin on July 5th, the diplomat immediately informed Ambassador Szygiełki that the time had come for a final reckoning with Serbia. Because of Tijer's opposition to war, the note avoided mentioning war explicitly, instead stating that Serbia must be eliminated as a political factor in the Balkans. Vienna wanted to know Berlin's position on such a scenario. Exactly 7 days after the assassination, on Sunday, July 5th, the note was delivered to Kaiser Wilhelm. The Kaiser, who had often been burned by impulsiveness, told Szygiełki he could not give a definitive answer without first consulting Chancellor Bethmann Hollweg. Normally, the meeting would have ended there, but Wilhelm, once again succumbing to his impulsive nature, expressed his support for the note. Action against Serbia must not be delayed. Russia's attitude would undoubtedly be hostile, but we have been prepared for that for years, and when war between Austria-Hungary and Russia becomes inevitable, we can be certain that our old loyal ally Germany will stand at our side. Russia is in no way ready for war at present and would have to think twice before taking up arms. After this meeting, Wilhelm summoned every senior official he could find in Berlin to his office. Among those present were General Hans von Plessen, head of the military cabinet General Moritz von Linke, and War Minister General Erich von Falkenhayn. At the opening of the meeting, the Kaiser read aloud the diplomatic notes presented to him by Szygiełki and briefly summarized his conversation with the ambassador. He then opened the floor for discussion. Many in the room understood that what was being implied was war. Falkenhayn, however, was not entirely convinced. In his report to the Chief of the General Staff, Moltke, who was undergoing spa treatment in Karlsbad, Falkenhayn wrote that it was difficult to discern exactly what the Austrians were aiming for. The War Minister concluded that the note did not explicitly demand war and shared this view with Moltke. In reality, both Count Oyos and Szygiełki had indeed hinted at war to the Kaiser, and Wilhelm had expressed support for this view. But when pressed to lay out the reasoning for such a decision, the Kaiser resorted to vague language. In particular, Falkenhayn and Bethmann Hollweg could not arrive at a definite conclusion regarding the true intent of the Kaiser in the note. Both believed the Austrians were speaking in empty phrases. Hoyos's trip to Berlin was, in fact, meant to dispel this uncertainty. The Austrians wanted to underline their war aims beyond any doubt. In a meeting with his counterpart Arthur Zimmermann, Oyos agreed on the idea of a preventive war. He went a step further, revealing Austria's plan for an unprepared strike against Serbia, after which Serbian territory would be divided among Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, and Albania. Zimmermann merely smiled at this statement and raised no objections. Although the two men agreed in principle, they were not the decision-makers. The ultimate decision would rest with the Kaiser and Chancellor Bethmann Hollweg. But Hollweg was a figure distrusted by the hawkish faction. His attempts at rapprochement with Britain had not been well received by the advocates of war, who among themselves referred to the cautious Chancellor and the apprehensive monarch as two old women. The British, too, saw Hollweg as the spokesman for peace in Berlin, and he was not particularly popular within the army. Wilhelm, however, had known Bethmann since childhood and liked and trusted him. Even at the best of times a pessimist by temperament, Bethmann in July was in deeper gloom than usual. His depressive personality was balanced by his beloved wife Martha, who had sadly left him in May. The loss was devastating. Now he suffered from insomnia, was gaining weight, and was generally anxious. The Chancellor, who had planned to spend the summer on holiday in the countryside, saw his hopes dashed by the Sarajevo affair. Returning to the capital, Bethmann arrived at the meeting with the Kaiser at the last moment and had not fully grasped the seriousness of the situation. The talks on Sunday, July 5th, did not go well for him. It was only the next day, when he received Count Hoyos, Ambassador Shoghieni, and Zimmermann, that the Chancellor realized the depth of Austrian seriousness. Going through a transformative period in his life, Bethmann Hollweg, for once stepping outside his usual cautious stance, would act according to Austrian wishes. In regard to our relations with Serbia, the German government believes that we should not decide what to do on our own. Whatever we decide, we can absolutely count on Germany standing by us as our ally. Like the Kaiser, the Chancellor believes that immediate action against Serbia offers the most suitable and decisive solution to our difficulties in the Balkans. He also considers the present moment more favorable than any later date. The German government was speaking with one voice, as soon as possible, at the earliest possible moment, without delay. German statesmen were telling different people the same thing, treating Austria's rapid intervention almost as a precondition. This was a critical turning point. For the first time, the argument that Helmut von Moltke and Konrad von Hötzendorf had been making for years was also being championed by Bethmann Hollweg. But the most crucial point was that the German government promised Austria-Hungary full support, essentially a blank check. This decision, taken without serious opposition and without a detailed risk assessment, amounted to crossing the Rubicon. The first move that would set in motion an irreversible crisis came through miscalculation from Germany. At the Potsdam meeting on July 5th, everyone around the Kaiser believed that, despite being Serbia's friend, Russia would not go to war. This is why, at the same meeting, when War Minister Falkenhayn asked the Kaiser whether he wanted preparations made in case of a major war between the great powers, Wilhelm replied in the negative. The Germans believed that while supporting Vienna, they could keep the war within limits. On July 6th, the day Bethmann Hollweg approved Austria's course, the Kaiser told Navy Minister Admiral von Kappel that the Tsar would not agree to side with the murderers, that therefore there was no risk of the military conflict spreading, and that neither France nor Russia was ready for war. In fact, Wilhelm believed that Russia was not prepared for any serious war. In late 1913, in the aftermath of the Albanian crisis, he had told Ambassador Shoghieni that Russia does not trouble me for the moment, and for the next 6 years there will be no point in fearing them. But Wilhelm and the Germans, and indeed the Austrians, were deeply mistaken. They failed to understand how important any potential Austro-Serbian war had become for the Franco-Russian alliance. They did not grasp that neither state would pay much attention to the question of who started the conflict. Most importantly, as they gave Austria a blank check along with their advice, there was another truth the Germans did not know, but would learn in the most bitter way. Istvan Tisza. On the afternoon of Sunday, July 5th, Austro-Hungarian Chief of the General Staff Konrad von Hötzendorf was at Schönbrunn Palace arguing the necessity of war. In his view, Emperor Franz Joseph had now reached the point of accepting that a war with Serbia was inevitable. The emperor asked, "But if everyone, especially Russia, turns against us, how will you conduct this war?" Konrad replied with a question of his own. "Do we have Germany's support behind us?" Franz Joseph evasively answered that he was not sure and was awaiting a reply regarding the note sent to Berlin. "If Germany stands with us, will we declare war on Serbia?" Konrad pressed. "In that case, yes," the emperor answered. That same day, the military governor of Bosnia, Oskar Potiorek, would obtain crucial information from the interrogation of Danilo Ilic. He managed to extract a confession that Major Tankasic, an officer close to Apis, had trained the assassins. This admission was vital for Vienna, as it would make it much harder for Tisza, the most serious opponent of war, to maintain his stance against conflict with Serbia. On July 6th, Vienna again became the scene of important meetings. Hötzendorf met with Foreign Minister Berchtold. Unaware of the emperor's stance, Berchtold was informed of it for the first time by Hötzendorf. If German support was secured, there would certainly be a war with Serbia. While every official institution in Vienna was alive with activity, on the morning of Tuesday, July 7th, Count Oyos returned from Germany. Going straight to the Bauhausplatz, the foreign ministry, Oyos confirmed the accuracy of the positive reports from Berlin. He also relayed to Conrad and Berchtold the pro-war conversation he had had with Zimmermann, making it clear he had returned from Berlin with exactly what he had wanted. Even if our operations against Serbia lead to a major war, Germany will stand firmly at our side. It advises us to strike immediately. The pace of events in Vienna quickened by the hour. As soon as he received the news, Hötzendorf went straight to the military headquarters. His first telegram was sent to Archduke Friedrich, expected to assume command of the Austro-Hungarian army in wartime following Franz Ferdinand's death. He instructed the Archduke to cancel his trip to Hamburg and await urgent developments. Hötzendorf had now taken the wheel and begun preparations to ready the army. Berchtold likewise threw himself into work, deliberately kept out of the German talks. Tisza convened a meeting with German ambassador Heinrich von Tschirschky and Austrian Prime Minister Count Sturck. In this meeting, Count Oyos first read aloud 2 telegrams Shugieni had sent from Berlin, then repeated to Berchtold what he had told him earlier about his discussion with Zimmermann. He laid out the entire scenario, nothing withheld, of a sudden strike on Belgrade and the partition of Serbian territory. Tisza was genuinely horrified by what he heard. The Hungarian leader, who had been working to restrain even the notion of a preventive war, now found himself staring at what seemed like a war of annexation. He quickly insisted to those present that the annexation plans and the conversation with Zimmermann represented personal views, and that this could not be a war to divide Serbia. Yet, in the afternoon cabinet meeting, the balance tipped decisively against him. Everyone except Tisza had moved into the pro-war camp. Berchtold opened the meeting by briefing those unaware about Oyos' secret mission to Berlin. He explained that the talks with Germany had yielded an extremely satisfactory result, and that both Kaiser Wilhelm and Chancellor Bethmann Hollweg had solemnly promised unconditional German support in the event of complications leading to war with Serbia. According to Berchtold, the German government was fully aware that an armed clash with Serbia could lead to war with Russia. Despite the risks, he argued, showing weakness in the present crisis would be disastrous. Only a timely reckoning with Serbia could prevent the collapse of the dual monarchy. Faced with the prevailing mood among the leadership, Tisza struck a diplomatic tone, saying he now saw the possibility of military action against Serbia as less remote, but he was still determined to play all his cards. In his view, an attack without sufficient diplomatic justification would turn all of the Balkans, except Bulgaria, against Austria. After the Second Balkan War, exhausted Bulgaria could offer little real help on the battlefield. Opportunistic Romania would certainly side with Serbia, and most likely Russia would as well. Austria-Hungary would then be facing a 3-front war. For this reason, Tisza insisted that all diplomatic avenues be exhausted. His first step was to propose that the dual monarchy prepare specific demands to be presented to Serbia. If these were rejected, an ultimatum could then be issued containing the threat of armed intervention. Should Belgrade accept the demands, Tisza argued, Austria would score a major diplomatic success and its prestige in the Balkans would rise. If the Serbs refused, then Tisza would accept military action. Thus began the opposition that would change the course of events. Tisza stood firmly against the swift war, favoured by Germany and desired by Austria. He was not saying no to war, but with a 2-stage ultimatum scenario, he was almost eliminating the chance of catching Serbia and Russia unprepared. At the meeting, Austrian statesmen tried to refute Tisza's arguments one by one. They warned that an ambiguous policy could result in the loss of Germany's support. To them, even the best diplomatic victory was worthless. The opportunity to solve the problem during the Balkan War had already been missed. After all, had the Japanese declared war before attacking Russia in 1904, Austria should use the element of surprise rather than telegraphing its intentions to everyone. All of this sounded perfectly logical. But by trying to dismantle the Hungarian Prime Minister's arguments, the other ministers had, without realizing it, conceded the debate's framework to him. Unlike the statesman who strayed from the core issue, Tisza kept opposing on the same point. And, incredibly, this resistance would succeed. The meeting minutes would record. He is ready to accept the view that mobilization should not be initiated until concrete demands have been communicated to Serbia and, in the event of their rejection, an ultimatum is issued. Berchtold would close the contentious meeting with these words: "Although differences remain between Count Tisza and the others, we are now closer together, since the Hungarian Prime Minister's proposals will in all likelihood still lead to a declaration of war against Serbia." Anxiety-filled days awaited Berchtold. The Hungarian side had blocked any quick initiative, while German statesmen were pressing him on the need to act swiftly. On Wednesday, July 8th, German Ambassador Cziszki went to see Berchtold to learn the outcome of the recent meeting. Dissatisfied with what he heard, the ambassador told Berchtold that Berlin expects action to be taken against Serbia, and it is impossible to overstate how incomprehensible Germany would find it if this opportunity were missed without delivering a blow. In fact, Austria had, without realizing it, brought about such a delay itself. The Austro-Hungarian army had recently granted a summer harvest leave for soldiers from rural areas, creating a natural obstacle to the desired rapid war. Chief of the General Staff Konrad von Hötzendorf had reluctantly approved the decision in order to placate powerful landowners in the dual monarchy. When Konrad returned to military headquarters, he discovered that 7 of the 16 army corps had only just been granted harvest leave. Most of these soldiers would return from leave between July 19th and 25. Cancelling the leave would completely reveal Austria's intentions. Therefore, the army could not be fully mobilized for at least 2 more weeks. The war party's hands were effectively tied. Tije's opposition, combined with the harvest leave, pushed Hötzendorf and Berchtold toward a decision: the ultimatum could not be sent before July 22nd. In this way, Austria-Hungary would lose precious days one by one, while the wave of outrage and the moral high ground generated worldwide by Franz Ferdinand's assassination would gradually fade. There was another problem for the Austrians. On July 15th, French President Poincaré and Prime Minister Viviani were set to depart for Russia on a long-planned visit. After an expected 5-day sea journey, the French delegation would arrive in Petersburg on July 20th. From this perspective, the July 22nd plan was fraught with danger. Poincaré and Tsar Nicholas could be raising glasses together when they learned of the ultimatum and could easily and amicably coordinate plans. Thus, July 22nd was a highly risky date. Bearing this in mind, Berchtold tried to ignore the harvest leave issue and launched a counter-initiative. His idea was to present the ultimatum on July 15th, just as the French began their 5-day voyage, so that the diplomatic crisis would begin and end before the Entente powers could meet. But this clever plan, too, ran into the Tisza obstacle. At the July 7th meeting, Tisza had made his signature on the ultimatum text a condition. While he did not reject Berchtold's proposal outright, he stalled it, informing the foreign minister that the ultimatum would have to be discussed and approved by a full cabinet. The earliest such meeting could take place was Sunday, July 19th. Even if the ultimatum were delivered on the 19th, Poincaré would reach St. Petersburg just a few hours later. Berchtold had no desire to present the ultimatum in a political climate that would foster a French-Russian show of unity. Thus, that plan too was scrapped, and Vienna approved the decision to deliver the ultimatum immediately after the French departed St. Petersburg. Only one task now remained: prepare the ultimatum, complete the necessary arrangements, and above all, keep mouths shut. But Austria would commit an astonishing blunder at the most critical moment. The efforts to keep the ultimatum secret were extensive. Many senior officials had left Vienna. According to reports he sent back to Russia, even Nikolai Shebeko, the Russian ambassador in Vienna, had been deceived by the ruse. Berchtold had instructed diplomats to avoid any discussion of the Sarajevo incident. Still, some form of response from the dual monarchy was expected, and Vienna was teeming with spies and informants seeking to learn Berchtold's intentions. A single leak to an enemy embassy could allow France and Russia to coordinate their response during the Petersburg summit, ruining Berchtold's plans. This entire policy of secrecy collapsed quickly due to a leak originating in Berlin. On July 11th, German Foreign Minister Gottlieb von Jagow mentioned Austria's intentions to the German envoy in Rome. The envoy raised the subject in a conversation with Italian Foreign Minister San Giuliano. San Giuliano immediately sent word to his embassies in St. Petersburg, Bucharest, and Vienna. The Austrians, who had cracked Italy's cipher and closely monitored the information flow between Vienna and Rome, discovered that the Italians had learned of Austria's plans from the Germans and relayed the information to two rival capitals. The Italian aim was to prompt Russia and Romania to intervene, thus preventing Vienna from taking any action. But an even greater leak would come from the most unexpected source. Berchtold himself, who had warned everyone, sent Hötzendorf and Krobotin on holiday as a precaution, and ordered all diplomats to stay silent would make the fatal mistake. On Monday, July 13th, he invited an old friend, Count Heinrich von Lützow, for a meeting. Berchtold regarded the 62-year-old Lützow, who served as Austria-Hungary's ambassador to Italy until 1910 before taking early retirement, as a wise man whose counsel he valued. To his old friend, Berchtold revealed his plans towards Serbia. Upon hearing them, Lützow warned that the idea of limiting a conflict with Serbia to the region was a fantasy. Disturbed by what he had learned, he decided to tell others. One of the retired diplomat's closest neighbours and frequent dining companions was Sir Maurice de Bunsen, the British ambassador in Vienna. At lunch on Wednesday, Lützow warned his friend that the dual monarchy can no longer tolerate Serbian insolence. A note is being prepared. It will be completed when the Sarajevo investigation is concluded. No futile negotiations will be tolerated. Should Serbia refuse to yield, force will be used to compel it. Shocked by what he heard, de Bunsen immediately returned to Vienna and informed Edward Grey of the note. Interestingly, Grey did not share the news with the Russians, but Berchtold would pay dearly for his loose tongue nonetheless. The next day, de Bunsen told Russian ambassador Nikolai Shebeko about the note. Shebeko promptly relayed the information to Sazonov in Russia. Now the Russians knew much of the game. On top of that, Berchtold made yet another blunder. Vienna sent a direct telegram to the Austro-Hungarian embassy in St. Petersburg asking when Poincaré would be leaving the city after his summit with the Tsar. The telegram, which sounded almost like confirmation of the rumors Russia had already heard, was intercepted by cryptologists, who quickly passed the news to Sazonov. Now a new act was opening in the drama leading to catastrophe. Everyone knew everything, yet behaved as if they knew nothing. The stage was set for the final performance before the guns began to fire.